Hey, my name's Owen Brady. I'm 12 years old. I know it's been hard and whatnot getting through the pandemic and COVID, but I really hope that we can all find some sort of peace because we're bigger than this. We can overcome this. It's just a matter of time before it's over, and I hope that you can find a bit of peace in this song. Thank you.
Now, that is the way to open Children's Advocacy Week, isn't it? It's a good reminder of why we're all here. I don't know about you, but one of my favorite moments when I was a kid, and one of my favorite moments now as a grandpa of a lot of grandkids, is Christmas Eve. As great as Christmas Day is, there is a certain anticipation and lightness on December 24th that just elevates my spirit. Since our official kickoff for Children's Advocacy Week is Tuesday, uh, I guess today is kind of Children's Advocacy Week Eve. And it's a time for us to talk about purpose, challenge, and opportunities on behalf of Kentucky's kids as this 2021 general session gets into real high gear this week. Before we get into context and substance, we have lots of requests and details that we want to share with you. To do that is my colleague, Clarissa Mobley. Clarissa?
Thank you, Terry. Hey, I'm Clarissa Mobley with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and as Terry said, I wanted to remind you all of a few things you can do to follow Children's Advocacy Day events this year, stay connected with other advocates, and how to reach out to your legislators. First, check out our Blueprint for Kentucky's Children policy priorities and our bill tracker. We'll drop links for those right now in the chat and in the Facebook comments. You can tag those, or you can star those or save those for later. There are fact sheets there that you can learn more about each policy priority, and on the bill tracker, you can see where bills are in the process towards getting passed. Second, you can reach out to your legislators, whether that's okay to ask them to vote on a bill, just to introduce yourself, or even say thank you. And try and schedule a virtual meeting with them later this week or later in the legislative session. If you don't know who your legislators are or you don't have their contact information, you can use our legislator lookup tool and our advocacy toolkit, and we will also drop a link to that as well. Finally, you can download our Children's Advocacy Week app or check out the web version. I actually have the app downloaded right here, so I'm going to show it to you. This is the app. It's really great and exciting. So basically, the app is what you can use to schedule and see all of your events. It's where we're going to post the Zoom links. And if you have the mobile version, you can build your own personalized schedule. So that's on here. You can create all of the schedules. You can see events. This is one of the events. And then you can add it to your schedule right there. And then if you click the little star calendar at the top, it shows you your events for the week. and everything that you've signed up for. So on this, we encourage you to post on our social feed, which is really fun and exciting part of this app. It's, so, it's waiting for someone to post up. Oh, we have our first post. So Jesse, woohoo, thank you for that. You can share a post or a picture of you in action this week advocating for kids, a message of gratitude for your legislators, or a favorite moment during any of the virtual events that we have. And special shout out and thanks to our social media sponsors, AT&T and WellCare, for their support of the app and for that social feed. And I'm going to pass it back to Terry to continue us on with the rest of the day.
Hey, Clarissa, thanks so much. Clarissa handles everything like social media that I know nothing about. So she is a invaluable part of the efforts this week. So I mentioned to you that that today felt a little bit to me like Christmas Eve. And joining us today on this Children's Advocacy Week Eve is not necessarily Santa or Blitzen, but it is Renee Shaw, which is maybe even better. Renee, thanks for making time to join us. And it is so exciting that I get to ask you the questions instead of you asking me the questions today.
We'll see how this turns out.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I am sure that most of you know that that Renee is the co-host or the host and producer of Kentucky Tonight, the seminal public affairs program in the Commonwealth. This time of year, she gets to do a legislative update every night as well. So she has a busy schedule. Renee actually was born a Tennessee volunteer, but migrated to Western Kentucky University, I believe. Not only is she a cornerstone at KET. She joined that organization, I think, like 1997, apparently at the age of 12. So there we go. But, Renee also is such a respected voice in her field. I think I'm right that she teaches folks about journalism from Georgetown College to Cambodia. So Renee, we are so happy to have you. And our purpose today with you and in an interview with Senator Givens that follows is to talk to folks about the meta-narrative of Frankfort. We're going to be spending this week with 17, 18, 19 events that focus on individual issues. But, my hypothesis is that we've got to understand the big picture in Frankfort before we can get into specific bills, wins, and areas. So nobody talks to more Frankfort movers and shakers than you do. And I'm wondering, talking to all of our partners who are so committed to kids, what should be our best hope and our worst fears entering this 2021 session?
Well, that's a very good question. And before I begin my answer, I do want to thank you, Terry, and all of the fine folks with KYA, Mara, Patricia, so many who I've had the honor of working with. Patricia came to our studio. Well, she did to the Louisville studio and did a quick interview with us that will air either tomorrow night or Wednesday night about Children's Advocacy Week. And I will miss the energy that the group brings to Frankfort. And that's, I think, one pivotal point, that the good is that this is a short session and they've already used 8 days. So they have, 22 days remaining. The calendar has been adjusted so that they're not convening on most Mondays. And there's also some time set aside explicitly in the new calendar for Budget Conference Committee. And that's unusual to already have those dates already lined out. Budget Conference Committee meaning that the main players, there's about 12 folks who really, really work on the budget. right? So when you hear it being said that, well, other things can't happen because we've got to get a budget done, well, you've got a lot of other members who could still be working on other issues, because there's 12 main people, not including staff and budget review folks, that are really a part of that crafting process. So that part has already been laid out for March. Now they can adjust the calendar at will, and we know that. We could get like a day like today, a snow day, that could delay some process. The point I want to start with first is that because of the COVID restrictions and the fact that you all can't be in Frankfurt tomorrow, and others, advocacy groups, it does, one, change the energy, but it also, I think, impedes a little bit of the transparency of the process. You know, your testimony is submitted, maybe written. If you can get to Frankfurt, you know, I think they still allow that, or bring you in by Zoom or Blue Jeans or other platforms. But there's nothing like the engagement you get when you're not at the witness table. Terry will tell you, and Mara and all the rest, that the real engagement as far as getting a bill to be in a better state than it is currently is when you can talk to those lawmakers offside, offline, in the cafeteria, in the hallways, giving them a white paper. And so the fact that that level of engagement is not there right now, I know that lobbyists are, you know, doing it from their kitchen, right? And they would prefer to be in person as well. So, and we see that when amendments and committee substitutes are handled at the last minute, the press doesn't always have that information. So it makes it harder to, on the fly, make sure that you're analyzing that bill correctly when you can't physically see that language side by side. I'm still in Frankfurt most days. I mean, right now I'm at home and I have a show tonight, but I'm there most days. So I can go to a committee room and go to that staffer and say, can I get the committee substitute, if they'll give it out. But, you know, being able to in real time analyze what's happening, because they don't always explain what the changes are in a way that, if you haven't read the bill or you don't know exactly where they're amending, it may not make a lot of sense. And so I think the one thing to do is, you know, I think we're going to have to pay a lot closer attention to what's happening, even though we're doing it from a distance. The good is that there's already been a lot of robust action the first 8 days of the session. The Republicans, who are dominating the state legislature, did what they said they would do, and that was limiting the governor's power, pass a couple of anti-abortion bills, and that's what they've done. Now we'll see whether or not there will be a compromise agreement between the governor and the lawmakers on his power restrictions when it comes to handling the pandemic or other emergencies that could arise. We know that this is not just a Kentucky phenomenon. Half the states in the nation are dealing with state legislatures who are clamping down on gubernatorial executive emergency power. From Pennsylvania to Arizona, it's happening. And so, and those are Republican legislatures for the most part. So we know that this is going on, and we'll see how the impeachment process, this is either the good or the bad, and I'll let you all decide, how much oxygen that takes up in the session. As you know, there are 3 impeachment petitions that the special committee and panel to consider is taking. Now, we understand that they will consider the impeachment petition against the governor first. We know that one petitioner has dropped out. We'll see if others do the same. Then they may go in the order in which they were received. So it will be interesting to see the timeline upon which they will work. Can they work beyond the session if they don't finish in the days allotted? That's a question that I have. So we'll see what this process, how it unfolds, if they just dismiss them. We're already seeing and reading, you know, the back and forth between the Attorney General and the lawyer for the petitioners on that side. So that might actually be more of an interesting and back and forth between the Attorney General and those petitioners, the jurors in the case of Breonna Taylor. So we'll see where all of this shakes out. I think one of the things I have a question about, and my role as a journalist is not so much to provide commentary, even though I very well could. I know my role, and my role is to ask the questions that you, have questions about. And I think it's important to know, the impeachment committee is a little smaller group, but how much would that dominate time? The other thing about the COVID era legislature is that the debate has been truncated. So they agreed to some rules where when they're on the chamber floor, the House or the Senate floor, now a lot of the members in the first 8 days were on the floor, more so than I thought. But those who don't feel comfortable for various reasons can remote vote from their office. They have to be on the Capitol complex. They cannot be at their home district. They have to be on the premises, and they can vote remotely. But they can't, give those elaborate floor speeches. Right? I mean, that didn't, during the first few days of the session, there were lots of issues where people chose to be in the room so that they could have their voices heard. But we see as time goes on, and those, what they call orders of the day, the actual bills that they are to consider, once they elongate, how much will members want to, how comfortable will they feel being in a chamber like the House chamber, tightly
A lot
seated.
of people, yeah.
Lot of people for 3 or 4 hours, right? So I think that environment is going to inhibit some debate, just the nature of it. Whether or not that's good or bad, I'll let you all decide. But I do believe that Democrats in the minority have said, that's a concern they have, that you won't have the rigorous debate on these really important issues that, are coming before them or could be coming before them again in the way of the veto overrides.
Yeah. Great, Renee, thanks. An issue that I vacillate, I feel one way one day and that way the next. And you did such a great show on our divided nation a couple of weeks ago. I'm curious as to your thoughts as to how much the national narrative animates Frankfurt thinking. Or is that overplayed? Is it underplayed? I'm a legislator. Do I really chart my own rhetoric and opinions based upon district and Frankfurt? Or how strong is that national meta-narrative? I'm curious as to your perspective.
It's a very good question. And there was a time when I would say that there was quite a bit of dissonance between the cognitive process and goings on of Frankfurt versus Washington. Terry, that 60% of the current state legislature, they're freshmen, or they've only had 1 or 2 terms in the Kentucky General Assembly. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm doing interviews with freshmen and those who are, maybe had been here for a little bit, because I think it's important to know where they stand. I don't think that I could give a fair answer to that without knowing the personality drivers of these newer legislators, because I do remember that in 2017 and 2019, a lot of those freshmen were malleable in the way that, Trump was still a force, right? But not as much, it seemed, in how they approached governing. How they politicked to get in the office was one thing. How they governed was another. I don't know this class, and I'm getting to know them, how much attachment they feel to the president. We know that life issues are always going to rise to the fore. And those type of social wedge issues are always going to be what you campaign on. It's the fodder for the next election season. Now, the one good thing is that we're not in a scheduled election this year. There could be a special one because of an unforeseen circumstance. But, maybe perhaps we won't see so much of that. But we do know that there are a lot of lawmakers who believe maybe they didn't care for the President Trump's personality, but they did believe in his policies. And I think that they're guided by that conservative ideology that some mainstream Republican says, well, if he would have just stuck to that stuff, the economic stuff, we can latch on to that. The personality stuff, we can't do anything about. But I do believe that they're, going to hold on to some of that thinking about what does tax reform look like? How much, what about the separation of powers? How much legislative independence do we really want? And those are things that have been brewing in the state legislature in Kentucky for many, many, many years. Robert Stivers is an institutionalist, and Jeff Hoover was when he was speaker. They talked to me constantly about institutionalism and the independence, not just of the legislature as a body, but the individual chambers. And, I think that, those guys I've always had a lot of respect for, because I knew that institution was greater sometimes than political agenda and personal agenda. But we'll see how this new group forms. Group dynamics are interesting. And we know that we have some strong personalities. So I think it'd be interesting to see how the session unfolds, what really emerges as those dynamics. The good thing is, good or bad, depending on how you view it, there is such a super duper majority in the House and Senate now, that the voices of the minority Democratic Party and the caucuses in each chamber are minimalized. I won't say they're marginalized, but they're certainly minimalized.
Yeah, I think Joni Jenkins herself dubbed that phrase "super duper minority." So that's so. When I'm on Kentucky Tonight, I'm always queued up when the host of that show says, "So the final question," and it seems like you always look at me and say, "And we just have a moment." I don't know why you perhaps feel the need to do that, but so the final question, and we just have a moment, Renee, is my perspective on this, and I hope this doesn't take you out of your comfort zone. I don't think it will. I really believe that the partners on this call certainly have an obligation around intellect. We want them to be smart on policy. We want them to base policies on data. But you probably know, because you and I have talked about this, I really see this as an effort of the heart or the soul. Yeah. I know you're pretty upfront that you're a person of faith. I think at your church, you do everything from manage external facing to teaching Sunday school. So, I'm comfortable asking you that. To close out, this is the first activity of the week. We got folks who have been to every children's advocacy event, and we got lots of folks for whom this is a brand new experience. So I don't know if you can totally step out of that KET role, but I'm wondering if you could talk to folks in terms of your perspective on their heart and what they need to bring to the table.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation. It's why I did the show A Nation Divided and committed to doing a series of programs about we need to see each other. And in fact, I wanted to name my series that I did on these civil discourse breakdowns, I See You, and a hashtag, meet me where you are. Right? We often talk about that, Terry, in terms of education. When we talk about marginalized kids and educators and those gaps in relating, we say we got to meet people where they are. And I think there are some movements. There's a bill, Senate Bill 10, that establishes a commission on race and access to opportunity that has bipartisan support. I think that we need to have those conversations, and we do have to do a heart job on folks, but it comes in one, being exposed to people who are not like you, not just the zip code that's just a couple of streets over, but I'm talking about a different worldview, perspective, experience. We all need that. Chris Kenning, I will say, if there was a really good piece in the paper 2 or 3 weeks ago that examined those who are Trump allegiance. Yeah. And it's a very long piece, but I will tell you it's worth the read, because many people can assume that, well, why would people be attracted to that? Or why would people be attracted to Black Lives Matter? Well, let's go ask them. Let's get out of our comfort zone and say, I don't want to pass judgment. I want to meet you where you are. There is a book I'll recommend, because I know your time is short. It's a book called I Don't Agree with You, but I'm Listening. I disagree, but I'm listening, or I don't agree with you and I'm listening. It's by Sarah Holland and Beth Silvers, and they are, at one time, I don't know if they're of different parties now, but when they wrote the book, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican, and one had worked for Hillary Clinton, and another had been involved in Republican politics, and it's the art of the argument. John Dickerson from CBS News had a wonderful essay a couple of years ago about we have lost the art of the argument. One, we have to stop talking and start listening. So I need to see the person in Eastern Kentucky who is very different from me, different experience. I needed to listen to that person, not talk. and say to them, you know, I see them. The communications model, because that's my master's, is not so much about getting to a shared agreement. It's about a shared meaning, a shared understanding. That's what we've lost. So we have to get to a place of saying, you know, I may not agree with you. When you kneel down, Wildcat BBN player, when the national anthem is being played, that hurts my heart. I don't understand that. Well, then let's forge a conversation with those basketball players and say, what is encouraging you to do that? And then from a judgment-free perspective, we got to remove the judgment first, Terry, before we can get to the heart. I believe it's possible. And I believe that right now, if we don't do that work, we are in a pretty bad predicament as for our republic. I'm not just speaking from a particular party perspective. Our democracy is at stake here if we don't get it together. And I believe Kentucky can help lead the way. And this is how you do it. You know, and so I welcome people's opinions and perspectives about how KET can be the bridge to these communities. If you have an idea, hit me an email, rshaw@ket.org, or follow me on Twitter @ReneeKET. Send me a DM. I'd love to hear what you're saying, because that's the problem. People like me sit in these, you know, offices and think because I read a lot and talk to people like Terry Brooks, I know everything.
Yeah.
Right? Well,
Yep.
I don't.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got to just talk more.
Yeah. Renee, thank you. I know Mondays are your crazy day.
Oh, it's good.
You taking time to join us means a lot. And, you know, Renee, when we think about civil discourse, there is no one who engenders that at a better level than you. I appreciate what you do every day in so many ways. Thanks for being here.
Thank
so
you.
Along with Renee Shaw, we wanted you to hear from a legislator on really the same themes, that meta-narrative of what's happening in Frankfort, what are the drivers, what are the cornerstones. And when we thought about that, we felt like an ideal candidate was Senator David Givens. Senator Givens is clearly a driver and a leader in the majority caucus in the Senate, but he is also a guy who has worked with Democratic members in the House, Democratic members in the Senate, rural and urban. He is a guy that brings people together. He's a guy that understands the strategy at play. We thought that might be a really good way to kick off Children's Advocacy Week version of Christmas Eve, getting you ready for that rally on Tuesday at 10 o'clock to formally start this year's Children's Advocacy Week. So here in a pre-recorded interview is Senator David Givens. We thought really hard about how to begin the week, because I think the beginning of an effort like this carries both substance and symbolism. And here's what I wanted for our first session. I wanted a conversation about the meta-narrative of civic life in America with an individual who I knew brought wisdom and expertise. And when I thought about the topic, I had shared off camera with our guest that my hit list of guests really focused on Senator David Givens, Senator David Givens, or Senator David Givens. Hey, guess who we have as our guest today? Senator David Givens. So, Senator, thank you so much for being here. You know, I've shared with you before, and I always try to be transparent with our viewers and partners. I just have such respect for you. I've told you more than once that we work really well with President Stivers. Candidly, we did not work all that well with President Stivers' predecessor, but we had found a LRC staffer named Harlan Hatter who would help us out, kind of give us a little guidance, give us a little wisdom over here. And I believe it was probably at the beginning of the 2009 session that Harlan said, "Not going to be around to help you." And I'm like, what do you mean you're not going to be around to help us? He's like, well, it's so weird. We got this freshman senator who they're going to put in charge of the Agriculture Committee. He's going to be the chairperson. He's never even been here. I don't know what's going on. And they've told me to staff that committee. Everybody says he's a magical presence, and we're just going to have to see. Well, Senator, you may recall that person who disrupted my access to Harlan Hatter was you. But the good news is all those folks were right. You do have a magical presence. So I would not be authentic in this conversation if I didn't open by saying what a fan I am of yours. And we appreciate you being the guy to kick off the 2021 Children's Advocacy Week.
Terry, thank you for those kind words. And it is an honor to be part of this first week celebration, this week celebration around children's advocacy. You and I have discussed before, voices are so important in helping shape policy. And the more voices, then the broader that message is. But at the same time, a broad message has to be focused so that all those voices are singing from the same song sheet. Why is it important to do what you and your colleagues do of bringing lots of voices focused on one or two or three at most messages in a session like this? Again, we've got to have an event to galvanize those voices, and so this week is a celebration of that event. Let me pause for a moment too and say thank you for those kind words. My respect for you is equally immense, and the work that you do. I do have a bit of an issue though when you set expectations like you did. It's much more pleasant for me and my life experiences to set the bar low and then surprise people in a positive way. And I fear you may have jinxed me on this one. So
okay, well, actually, you were the only guy up there, so we just said, "Is anybody there?"
Yeah, that's more like the truth.
Okay. Well, thanks for falling into this. Well, when I think about your leadership, I certainly could talk about, and we're going to get into some specifics, but one of the things you always bring is a lot of wisdom and expertise. You don't tackle any issue if you don't know a lot about it, and that's important. We'll get to that. But what characterizes you, Senator, is style, and that is that you are able to work in ways that bring people together, urban and rural, Republican and Democrat. You tend to find issues that folks who don't agree on a lot tend to agree on that. I don't know if it's safe to quote to a Republican state senator something that President Biden said during his inaugural address, but he said that politics doesn't have to be a raging fire. And that's how you operate. You actually cool things out rather than raise things up. And I'm curious, how is that your preferred style? Because if we're honest, whether it's in Washington or Frankfurt, there is a real penchant these days to get things revved up, to frankly create divisiveness. You run so counter to that. What's the deal? Is it your faith commitment, your life experience, practical wisdom, all of the above? What's the deal with David Givens? How does he operate, and why does he operate in the way he does?
Terry, it is all those things. It's certainly a life experience kind of perspective. And it's also, look, all of us know our skill sets. I'm not saying that you catch me, you must be catching me in my good moments, because there are lots of moments that I'm not the best version of who I could be. But I'm hopeful that in this policy space that I enjoy so very much, trying to help influence in a positive way, that I hope I am that saucer that cools the tea sometimes. I hope I am that voice that, if it doesn't cause comfort, at least it causes some introspection and some retrospective among all the folks that are engaged in that. And Terry, I'll be honest, that's the place that I operate the best. And so if I can find an opportunity to slow people down, to try to start from some shared meaning and from ideas that are aligned before I move a conversation to places that we differ, it seems to work better for me, and I feel more productive. Now, inherently, that means I don't like to rush into places where there's lots of turmoil. I don't love to be in the middle of those heated arguments. I don't run from them, but I don't run to them, because it's not always my strength to grab the microphone and start shouting at somebody, or to tweet something in anger, that's not the best version of me, and I don't tend to perform well there. And so what you're giving me undue credit for is me really, rather than talent, it's wisdom and knowing that I'm not super good in those heated shouting, door slamming, stomping sort of moments. And I try to not get into those because I can't find benefit there for me or for good policy. And so, Terry, your observations, you're too kind in what you say, and I mean that, you really are. One of the things that we do here is try to balance that passion that we all have for that logic that has to also be in the space. And how do we craft policy that has a blend of both, because we're driven by the things that cause us to want to be here, to do good as we see good, to shape a future that we see the way we see it. How do we bring those passions, but still let logic enter into the conversation to say, yes, if we could spend $150 million annually to promote children's advocacy, wouldn't that be a great and awesome thing? And isn't that absolutely right? Yes, it is. There's no doubt it is. And where are we going to go get the money? Well, it doesn't matter. Let's just go tax everybody to the point that suddenly we've got the money. Well, then what have you done to the economy long term? You've damaged it long term. How do we create that balance of passion and logic and reason to arrive at policy that can last to shape a commonwealth like we'd like to see?
I appreciate that. I'm curious as to one thing that obviously you and I and all of our viewers and partners today know, that we as a nation have been through a turbulent time, a turbulent fall, recent events in DC. Folks love the election results, hate the election results, believe the election results, don't. But we live in such a divisive environment nationally. I have to tell you, and this is like the most sincere question I can ask you, I can't figure out the impact of national events and tone on Frankfurt or vice versa. So do you have a sense that that meta-narrative in DC, does that trickle down and it affects and infects Frankfurt? You guys tend to separate what happens in the Commonwealth versus what happens at a federal level. What's the level of interaction, or is there a lot or a little? How does one impinge on the other?
Mm-hmm. No, there's a lot of relation there, and on the days that it's good, we celebrate that relation, and on the days that it's painful and taxing, it can create discomfort. And I'll give you a perfect example. So over the course of the last few weeks, as we've seen the presidential election, the conversations unfold, the pressures have been felt by lots of constituents. Those constituents have in them passions that are inflamed, both on the left and the right. And it is assumed, sometimes rightly, that we are part of that energy, even though we're in Frankfort, Kentucky, and not in Washington, D.C. So how do we move toward conversations that can give people the chance to be heard, but not so inflamed that we do lasting damage to the Commonwealth or to the nation as a whole? Terry, I think the place I like to start goes back to something I said a moment ago to you, and then earlier today in an interview that I did with Renee Shaw on KET. Let's start by celebrating some blessings. And I know sometimes that sounds preachy or tongue-in-cheek or however you want to phrase it. But look, I woke up this morning thinking about being interviewed by you. I woke up thinking about working on some policy with some of my staff here. I woke up thinking about being interviewed by Renee. I didn't wake up thinking about, am I going to have enough food today? I'm blessed. I didn't wake up worrying about my children's safety here in the United States of America. Now, I often will say, and you've probably heard me say this before, but especially to civic organizations, to eighth grade middle school social studies students, this ongoing experiment in self-governing that we refer to as representative democracy, it's an ongoing experiment that's fragile. It's a fragile experiment. It's not perfected, and the day we think we've perfected what we're doing is the turn of our demise. So we've all got to be mindful of how fragile this is. When we want to grab our phone to tweet something in anger, or we want to have that microphone stuck in our face so we can make that special drop the mic moment pronouncement that galvanizes us and galvanizes our believers and those that cheer for us, and we can drop the mic and walk out of the room and hear the accolades of, wow, you put them in their place, David. Wow, you really knocked them down, David. Is that good for us? Is that really good long-term for us? And I say it's not. Now, that doesn't mean we can sit in the corner and be a wilting flower in the face of strong challenges. We've got to speak, but we've also got to be mindful of others.
Okay, I appreciate that. I also think you and I tend to agree that I don't believe that togetherness necessarily comes from kumbaya as much as real work. And you have been somebody who consistently, for instance, have talked about that urban and rural kids' needs are far more similar than dissimilar. So you've never let this, I think, fallacious urban versus rural, rural versus urban divide. The other thing that you have, you were ahead of the curve because you've talked about the very uncomfortable reality of racial disproportionalities and disparities way before it became a topic du jour. I know that, again, recent events over the last several months has caused everyone to be re-engaged in that issue. And you're part of an interesting coalition of folks who are trying to get something focused in Frankfurt on racial justice this very session. Do you want to kind of share what you're working on, who's involved, and what your hopes are for that?
Terry, thanks for the chance to talk about that, because it's something that I'm passionate about, because I think it leads to what the future of the Commonwealth truly is going to be. And that's Senate Bill 10 is a piece of legislation that I filed just before we left on break, and the timing of it being filed was ideal. We had just finished those painful conversations around the election, and we were on the edge. Just as we were getting ready to leave, we saw the activities at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. that so struck the nerve of our nation. And along with that, we've had the summer that we've had of racial unrest and civil strife and the pain of those conversations. So Senate Bill 10 creates a commission titled the Race and Opportunity to Access Commission. And access to opportunity, the Race and Access to Opportunity Commission. And the goal is not so much, and I shared this just a few moments ago with Renee Shaw on her interview, the goal is not so much to meet the immediate needs that are pressing us. I feel confident those are going to be met through other legislative vehicles this session. So I'm not feeling like this checks the box for all the work we've got to do. We've got some real work specific to policy issues this session I think you'll see dealt with. But along with that trying to put out that fire, some of those fires, let's do some fire prevention. Let's do some future fire prevention. Let's create an intentional conversation where we bring together disparate voices around the questions of race, around the questions of access to opportunity, and how do we craft policy that moves the Commonwealth forward. So often we talk about how do we move Black people forward? How do we move white people forward? How do we move low-income people forward? I struggle when we put people in categories. If we're going to do a category, how do we move the citizens of the Commonwealth forward? And I can argue, Terry, and that's the statements that I'm making as it relates to Senate Bill 10 and this commission, trying to take this long-term view of policy. Not only is it morally the right thing to do for us to try to lift all lives, economically it benefits each taxpayer in the Commonwealth. When we can reduce rates of criminal activity, when we can take people off the Medicaid rolls, when we can educate people so they can get a better paying job and pay more tax money for all of us in the Commonwealth, all of us benefit from that. And I will also argue, Terry, that my conservative Republican Party, we are the party where we see the role of government is to provide access to all, access to opportunity for all. So if there are places in our systems of governing that are systems that have bias, we need to address that. If that's causing someone to not be the best version of themselves, it's in all of our best interest to get that right. And so, as I said in my floor speech just before we left, this was just on the heels of the conversation around the UK players kneeling and that galvanizing the media to launch into discussions about race. Let's do it intentionally, but let's do it in a structured way that gives voice to all. And when friends that I have great respect for in the legislature stand up and do floor speeches about the UK players kneeling, they're in essence saying, I don't understand completely. And I think that lends to the narrative of we've got to start to try to understand first before we try to be understood.
You can't talk about racial disparities, in my mind, for kids and not almost immediately thinking about the K-12 education system. Again, you have been way ahead of that curve. You were a vital part of Senate Bill 1 a few years ago around accountability and assessment. You were a key to the Safe Schools Senate Bill 1 work. And I think recently, I think it got hung up because of short session, et cetera, but I know you were doing a retrofit around accountability and assessment that had a lot to do with achievement, opportunity, and gaps. You're kind of a what I call a stealth K-12 guy. I know we do a lot of work with Senator Wise, who does a wonderful job of leading the education committee, but you also are a major player in that sector. I'm curious, knowing the parameters of this session, short session and budgets and lots of other issues, are you cooking up something for K-12 as we speak, or is that a 2022 hot button?
Terry, thanks again for the question. And before your listeners leave thinking I am the only legislator in Frankfort that does anything, I want to push back a little and say, you mentioned one of those names. You actually mentioned a couple. We've got such tremendous talent in our caucus and in the Senate and in the House in general. Senator Wise and his leadership on education policy, Senator Alvarado and his passion, Senator Westerfield that you mentioned. We're blessed to have people that will bring their skills and talents and dedicate their time to trying to move policy forward. We did some fun things in K-12 education, and we were able to get that legislation passed because we were able to connect that KDE had to have. KDE had to have us redefine what schools look like to align with those federal regulations. In doing that, we were able to move this conversation of comparing the gap at one school to the gap at another school, because students, families, schools, communities all come from different places. We're all here in the Commonwealth together, but we've all walked different walks. We carry different challenges with us. So instead of us comparing a school's gap to another school's gap and scoring them on that, let's measure their gain toward closing the gap. How are they moving? How are they accelerating? Are they moving toward the closure of that gap in some fashion? What are they doing compared to other schools and the way those other schools are closing that gap? So the gain to gap conversation was big, and us trying to move away from schools competing with one another and causing schools to compete with themselves. And on that topic, I want to jump for just a second to something else that I think is indicative of the chances we have in policy and trying to move the Commonwealth forward in ways that benefit all. One of the things that I've worked on for a number of years with the help of people much more talented than I has been a conversation around performance-based funding in post-secondary education. Long story short, for years we had done post-secondary college funding based on the percentage of the pie that you got years before. In 2014 and 15, we engaged policy leaders in a conversation about how do we change it and move it toward performance-based outcomes. We were fortunate to do that. We've set a goal of 60 by 30. If we can have 60% of the Commonwealth having a post-secondary degree or credential, by the year 2030, we will be at the national average. Education opens so many doors. In measuring our gain from 15 to 20, We've increased post-secondary degree and credential attainment by 17% in Kentucky, moving from 2015 to 2020. In underrepresented minority communities, 34% gain.
Wow.
The reason that we've been able to do the 34% gain is we've embedded some policies to move credentials forward with higher dollar rewards for these institutions if they would move underrepresented minority students on through the systems, get them degrees, get them credit hours, and ultimately, hopefully, land them in a good paying job where they can be productive and contributing members of their community. And so I share that with you to say, policy has such positive implications. The work that you do with children's advocacy is one of those examples. Anytime that we can find the little soft places to make the sort of subtle changes that largely go unnoticed, but may change 1 or 2 or 5 or 15 kids' lives, that has a magnifying ripple effect that we can't value that enough. And that's part of the thing I love about what you and your colleagues do with the blueprint. You don't slam us in the direction, you just subtly nudge us there. And you make it one of those so self-apparent sort of things that, how could you not do that? How could you not make this policy decision? And I love the way you don't bludgeon us, but you gently nudge us. And boy, are you persistent. You and your colleagues are persistent in doing that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Senator, our viewers and partners today are certainly sophisticated enough in the world of Frankfurt that they know the challenges that this session represents. Short session, first time ever in a short session, you've got to pass a 1-year budget. That 1-year budget, I think it's fair to say in many ways, is a predicate to the 2-year 2022 budget. I can't imagine that you guys are not looking ahead as well as looking in the immediate. We're certainly aware that there's lots of conversations around which branch of government should do X and which branch of government should do Y. But I'm curious, as our interview is heading toward the end, are there other threads that folks should pay attention to? Are there other themes or emphases that as the session unfolds, you guys are back this week, as we talk on Monday, you'll be coming back tomorrow. Are there other themes that we should be paying attention to as you reconvene?
Terry, there certainly will be. And I think when you see us come back in next week, you're not going to see us with the pace and the tone that we had that first week. We were able to do a lot in those 8 days. We've got a lot ahead of us still to do. I think the budget that you mentioned will be an important part of that. We're going to try rather hard. We're going to try to move that on through the system before we get bogged down in lots of other things that can divide us. And even though we have Republican supermajorities in the House and the Senate, people bring their own passions and their own initiatives to these conversations. And so it can get divisive, even though we are of the same political mindset in lots of ways. So the budget, continue to watch that. The legislative authority struggle, and I want to caution all those that are listening that think this is all about politics to understand, in my 12 years here, I think I've overridden a total of maybe 10 vetoes. 7 of those were all in one day, and they were Matt Bevin, Republican Matt Bevin vetoes. And so for those that are saying, well, all of this legislative authority is just partisan politics, it's an ongoing struggle that I think is inherent in our governing process, and it's been put there purposely by our founders. And so these branches of government that are divided, that struggle, it's very appropriate that we do. I'd like to encourage your listeners and viewers, one piece of policy work that I'm working really hard on with Speaker Osborne is House Bill 4. That's going to be a constitutional amendment related to our ability as the General Assembly to come back into session in times that we feel very, very strongly compelled to come back and do some work. So as you see that moving through, that will not, if it passes, it would not be on the ballot until fall of 22, but it would negate a lot of the need and the pressure that we feel around Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 1 and House Bill 2 of reining in emergency powers of the governor, those sorts of conversations. If we had the ability to come back and be the voice of the people in the Capitol here in Frankfurt doing policy, but only in those rare circumstances where we felt very strongly compelled to do it, I think it would cause us to do better policy and not do policy through the rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, you know, I think a lot of people, I think it's interesting because so many people thought you guys went into this session with a limited policy agenda, when actually it sounds like all of us should be on the alert for lots of positive policy steps. One thing that I want to make sure, because we've done this before and you always do a wonderful job, I always worry that our listeners and viewers and partners think about Frankfurt, think about, this is not you personally, but their senator, their representative. It's like they're the senator, they're the representative. What can I do? What do I have to do with them? We obviously have a different view, which is we feel like if our partners care about kids, they need to let folks know they care about them and how they care about them. Can you give folks a little ray of hope and a coaching tip? I'm sitting here, I've heard you say something, or in my own life, I have an issue that I think is really important for kids. I want someone to hear it. What do they do?
Very great question, and I always appreciate you asking that sort of question. I'm going to use 3 quick answers to provide you. One of those is work in an organization like KYA. Be part of that voice that helps shape the KYA policy. It is so critical that we have unified voices around policies like KYA promotes. And so, number 1, channel your passions and talents in that direction to communicate with a unified voice through an association. Secondly, don't ever fail to take advantage of the opportunity to know your legislators. Saturday, as is almost always typical, I put in a day at the farm store, loading bags of feed, waiting on customers, doing those things. In the course of a 5-hour morning, I probably had 15 conversations to some degree about policy. So all those, and it's not appropriate to tie me up for 2 hours at work, but come by and say, hey, Senator Givens, I saw this was moving through the legislature. What do you think? We are so close to the people. And that's one of the things I love about the work we get to do is we're so close to the people that we're very accessible. And I'm confident that everyone that may be listening, they have a representative or a senator that would be glad to entertain a conversation. I would hope those conversations always start and end at respectful, but engage the folks that represent you in those conversations. Last quick third thought about what someone can do. Terry, we're surrounded by opportunities every day. I was sharing with the group earlier a conversation that I had back in the summer, challenging a manufacturing group about how do we model and how do we mentor the next generation about what work looks like. And I shared a story about find someone in your community that you've never paid, some young person in your community you've never paid to mow the yard before, and get them to come mow your yard. Get some young person to do that. And I did one of those typical charges that I tend to do at the end of a meeting of hey, go and be the best version of yourself, but let's all agree that we're going to do this in the next 3 weeks. And about a week and a half later, a woman back in that community came by me and she said, I was there at your meeting. I heard the conversation. I took your charge series. I went and found a young man about 4 houses down from mine. I know he mows the yard at home. I asked him to come mow my yard one afternoon while I was gone, set it all up for him, explained it to him, told him what to do. Senator Givens, when I got home that evening, I found him sitting on my door, sitting on the porch. Yard had not been mowed, and I said, Johnny, what's going on? I thought everything was going to be done. And he said, Miss Tammy, I'm so sorry. I've come here to mow your yard. The lawnmower's there in the garage like you've described and explained. Everything looks perfect, but I can't figure out how to get that 48-inch deck out through that man door. The young man, in his life experiences, had never pushed a garage door opener button before and didn't know the garage door operated to open to let the mower out. So we don't have to look to do magnificent, monumental, earth-shattering things. If we can connect with a young person, give them a chance to connect with us, and then mentor them in positive ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Senator, I used a Joe Biden quote, and you didn't get off camera, so I'm going to close with a really comfortable one because I'm going to talk about that. Over 4 decades ago, Ronald Reagan said, "The struggle now going on for the world will never be decided by bombs or rockets, by armies or military might. The real crisis we face today is a spiritual one. At root, it is a test of moral will and faith." I have the same hypothesis that you, as a General Assembly, face a test of moral will and faith, not just this year, but every year. Can I tell you how much it means that you pass that test of moral will and faith with such class, grace, and substance every session? And I appreciate that more than you know. Thanks for being with us today to kick off 2021 Children's Advocacy Week.
Terry, it's been an honor, and I will say that Ronald Reagan was my president then. Joe Biden is my president today, and I'm proud to be an American.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you.